is the old pairing adage, what grows together goes together, too limiting, and how can we open our taste horizons? When it comes to spicy dishes, do you really have to resort to just beer or Riesling? And how can you pair wine with the flavorful dishes of the Caribbean, Africa, Asia, and other countries? Well, tonight you're going to get those stories and tips. If you're watching this video on the replay, please let me know in the comments. Just type the word replay. You can tell me where you're logging in from, what's in your glass. And similarly, if you're here on this live stream, I want to hear from you as well. I'm Natalie McLean, and I teach online food and wine pairing classes, and you've just joined one of the most passionate groups of wine lovers who gather every Wednesday at 7 p.m. to talk to the most interesting people in the world of wine, and I will introduce our guest momentarily. So I'm live streaming this video for the first time on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, but it's based on a recorded conversation I had with my wonderful guest for the podcast Unreserved Wine Talk. I'll be jumping into the comments live. I will be here during the live stream so that it can be more interactive. So hit me up with your questions. Let me know what stories and tips are you enjoying, what questions do you still have, and I'll respond to you in the comments. And let me say that 3 of you are going to win a copy of our guest's terrific new book, Wine Pairing for the People. All you have to do is email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com and tell me that you'd like to win a copy. I'll choose 3 people randomly from those who contact me. All right, back to our guest. Cha McCoy is an entrepreneur, educator, event producer, and author. As a certified sommelier with the Court of Master Sommeliers, she developed The Communion, a wine dinner series that offers an inviting, accessible approach to gathering and enjoying wine. This experience inspired her to open her first store, The Communion Wine and Spirits. Cha was named one of Wine Enthusiasts 40 Under 40. Cha has held coveted positions such as Cherry Bomb Magazine's first beverage director, the head of beverage for the Charleston Wine and Food Festival, and a sommelier at a Michelin-starred restaurant in Portugal and John Fraser Restaurant in New York. Passionate about education, she spends her spare time mentoring and teaching at her alma mater, Syracuse University, where she serves as an adjunct professor, educating and inspiring new wine drinkers. And she joins us now from her home in Harlem. Cha, we're so glad to have you here with us. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Natalie.
All right. So you wrote that you fell in love with wine while you were living in Italy. Can you tell us about that moment or the meal or the wine that made you realize you wanted to pursue wine professionally more than just a hobby?
Yes, so I was actually doing my MBA in international finance. I had the ability to work with a local winemaker as a part of a case study that I was doing, and they were getting into more of the import-export market. So that allowed me to be able to have one-on-one conversations with the winemaker, or at least with the winemaker's team, and also be able to taste is part of my immersion in Italy as well. Part of the experience of just living there. You know, every day we're having everything from wine at, if you spent any time in Italy, you'll know that there are these local wine producers who bring their wines to almost like a food market, and they just open like a tap of, and you can fill up like a water gallon and bring that wine home. And that's with local wines, you know, at the bare minimum price you can get, and work, you know, drinking with friends, enjoying and gathering is how it started. And then eventually when you have, you know, when you are a grad student, you don't have much money to do the fine dining experiences, but you begin to, in my case, it actually opened up the curiosity of wanting me to taste more and want to get to know kind of like the difference between each. Like, why is this one cost more? Or how come I didn't enjoy that one, but I really did like this one? So I wanted to know the names. I wanted to feel more confident and educated about what I was drinking for our next dining experience. And so that's kind of how the hobby or the love for it, you know, kind of grew. And then on my return back home to the U.S. and after graduating, I was passionate about wine and felt like that was something that I learned that was part of the lifestyle of living in Italy that we didn't really replicate in New York, maybe in California, et cetera, of the States. And that was something I wanted to bring with me, something I wanted to have a part of my life. I call it like the souvenir that I bring back, was that education about wine, that passion for it. And I realized I wanted to be connected to it maybe a little bit more than just, buying a bottle or two at home and, doing the studying. I didn't even know about the Court of the Masters, sommeliers, or any of the institutions at that time. I was literally learning from producers and being invited to vineyards, and had more of a everyday approach to learn about wine. And I went, got a job, and that was really just to keep my, if you want to say, connection back to Europe, at a local wine store in Harlem, called The Winery. And it was the perfect location because of, it was a few blocks just west, if you would say, or sorry, just east of Columbia University. It was located on 116th Street, which is considered Little Senegal. And then I lived just a few blocks north of it. So this is my neighborhood. Everyone is a melting pot of different cultures and classes and people. And that made it even more of an interesting dynamic of who the customers were for me to be able to serve on a daily basis. So that's where my official first wine job was at in 2012.
That's a great introduction to wine, from Italy to where you live now. I love the quote that you give from Shirley Chisholm. She said, "If they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair." And then you added that you brought two folding tables and started your own wine dinner series called the Communion. So tell us about that very first dinner in Harlem back in 2017.
Yeah, right after completing a trip to visit family that lives in Paris, I met someone who was a sommelier who was a friend of hers, and she's like, "Oh, you seem so excited about wine." This is years later. I've already live in New York and work at the store, and she's like, "You seem so excited. You should probably do something like a pop-up, or and host people on your own." And we were in her living room having a very similar experience, but it was more of a tasting. They did share some kind of like small bites, but her husband was a chef, so that was easy for her.
That helps.
Said, okay, with this, she wanted to educate people on wine, and I felt like that was a concept that I can bring back or create in my own way from my travels. At this point, I have already traveled to a few countries, already lived in Italy, and I wanted to give that same experience to my neighbors, And so I returned back to New York, and this was 2017-ish with this idea, or maybe even 2016, but started in 2017, where I finally was like, okay, well, let me just bring two folding tables. It was one folding table at first, and eventually a second one to kind of make a more communal long table effect, and started inviting friends, family, hood friends, because I was back where I grew up at in Harlem. So, and it was just like word of mouth. And then it wasn't about the dinners at first. It was more about education. So just changing the themes from rosé week to next week could be sparkling wine, and doing cheese, etc., from the different purveyors. And I thought that was fun. I realized that folks who had never been sort of like seated wine tasting before end up with, like, they would stay because they enjoyed themselves so much in my living room. They got hungry. I said, okay, if I'm gonna keep this going, I realized I gotta start bringing in some chefs or some food, a part of this experience, in order to keep people coming back, or and it was something different than what they would normally do on the weekend. So I incorporated the actual pairing of food, and not just the wine and cheese or whatever else, desserts, etc. I was bringing in, and then actually they kind of took off from there, and we got too big for my living room, and I eventually started hosting them as takeovers in different restaurants.
Wow. And can you remember anything memorable one of your guests said about these communal dinners?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just the experience of having people who, some of them I knew very, I didn't know them well, let's just say. Some were actually friends and family in the beginning. By like the fifth one, there started being folks that were like friends of friends, so I'd never met them before. So now I'm having actual strangers in my living room. And I think that just overall, the sentiment that this was the most they've ever learned about wine gave me the motivation to kind of continue to keep it going. Like, you could tell that even in a place like Manhattan, you can sign up for wine classes, and there's still a large group of people that were not spoken to, is what I noticed. And that's what inspired me to kind of, how do I make this a thing? Like, how do I keep this going? Wines they never heard of, that they would now fall in love with. They could tell that their palate was growing as they would attend maybe an event in April and come to another event in June, you know. And so that was the passion when I started seeing multiple people come back, or even sometimes a friend of mine will send his wife next time with one of her friends. So it gave me inspiration. So no exact quotes that I can share, you know, from that time, but just the sentiment that people were willing. It was more than just like, oh, we're coming to support, you know, Cha. It was more like, oh, I actually took something from this community and experience, and some of them even made friends amongst themselves. That this gathering gave much, like it had a much larger purpose than just kind of me teaching them about wine, because now they also kind of developed a community amongst themselves too.
That's great. And did you have any sort of warm up exercises, at the beginning, especially people perhaps who weren't familiar or a bit intimidated with wine? Is there something that got everybody kind of into the game of tasting and pairing?
Actually, the warm up exercise was always just to, like, you know, hug your neighbor, talk to your
Hug
neighbor.
your neighbor.
Yeah, I think there was something about, like, we are literally in a neighborhood. You're in my apartment, like, you know, you're in my living room. So get to know your neighbor moments. So I always started out with having some type of aperitif or just like bubbles, so that folks can start out just kind of socializing amongst themselves. I feel like that was more, you know, that was to get the energy or the vibe going more than kind of getting their palate going. Was more important to me, that they would leave there and feeling connected. Or if from one memorable moment, I think somebody connected that they had a similar relative, like a cousin in common
Ah,
after, you know, coming. Another person helped someone get a job by
wow.
connecting. Yeah, so I felt like that was way more important to me than trying to, you know, focus so much about the context, or how I teach at the university level, etc. About sitting in a classroom and this is a serious. They already feel like wine is intimidating and serious. So this was like a moment for you to be more relaxed, chilled, and still feel like you left here and learned something. So that's always was more important to me than me actually feeling like we need to dive right in with the content or the, you know, the deep knowledge.
Absolutely. Well, that really underscores my own approach to Cha. Like, wine is a connector, but it doesn't have to be so serious or always focused exclusively on the wine. So it's lovely that it led to other connections among your students who then went out, and of course, what better sort of casual, more comfortable environment than your own living room to start with wine. So that's great. You then opened the Communion Wine and Spirits in Syracuse, a wine and spirit shop, making you one of the few black women wine shop owners in America. What were your biggest challenges in that first year? And was there anything that surprised you?
Yes, I feel like, you know, as the legacy of the communion lived on, turn it into a brick and mortar was very important to me. Now I don't know in what way. I did move to Portugal to be able to open up a wine bar, and that was going to be the communion's actual like first location, almost like a tasting room wine bar, to continue that same feeling. I wanted to feel like it was my living room. I still wanted, in Lisbon legally you're able to sell bottles of wine as well as pour. In New York State you do not have that ability, unfortunately. So when the pandemic happened and I basically had to pivot. I guess that was the word for the pandemic, right? Everybody's pivoting. I returned back home to the U.S. and ended up finding my way back upstate, which is where that is my alma mater, where I went to do my university studies for my engineering degree. I ended up being connected with someone who told me about the open position of teaching. And so I recognized that there was a different clientele that was upstate, and there was something important that they're not getting, that they're almost like missing a wine culture that we did have down in New York City, or downstate as they would say. And that was really important about the shop, was like, how do I actually get folks to understand the wines that I'm trying to bring? So that was like a stronger, that was a stronger messaging. I think that being a woman of color I'm sure it had a lot of challenges, but I think it was more challenging to get customers who did not know this styles of wines, whether it's low intervention wines was predominantly most of my shop. When they're used to kind of like the large warehouse wine shopping, where some of the big brands, quality wasn't the most important part. Only like branding, like the name is a brand they know is more important. And so that was probably the hardest part about being in an area who is not familiar with this type of wine culture. Now, there's a lot of obviously transplants there who work at the university from different cities who've traveled or live other places, but that was probably the strongest, like that was the largest, I would say, adversity that I would challenge that I would have is once it opened, it's kind of like how can we get people to recognize that we are not like them, the other stores, and the ones who got it, they get it. You know, they come, they look for their orange wine or they look for, you know, pet nats, etc., things that they knew they could not find at any other store. But it was more or less we have to continue to preach. We're preaching to the choir, you know, selling wine to those people where I needed to acquire new customers. So I think that was the biggest struggle.
Well, all of that was great background. Everything that we've talked about, you're bringing to this new book, Wine Pairings for the People. So tell us, in a nutshell, what this book is about and how it's different from other pairing books that are on the market.
Yes, from my research of different pairing books that I refer to, coming up as a young budding sommelier or cavist at the wine shops that I worked at, it was something missing beyond the normal, or you know, a hamburger goes well with this, so American focus dining would be, of course you'll see barbecue, and you know there will be some American classics in there, steak, etc. When it comes to wine pairings for food from different cultures, it would mostly focus heavily on Western world or European food culture, and that was something I was like, okay, well, there's definitely more food than that's out there, and these would be really thick books that really talked in depth about the pairings, but I also feel like lacked context. So maybe their goal was more about the art of actually pairing versus being able to understand the at length how much different categories in wine, in styles of wine, and categories of food that's out there in cuisines. So that was something I wanted to really challenge, is my own upbringing in wine, where I would see in the educational platforms we would kind of pigeonhole anything that wasn't basically European food goes into one bucket as ethnic, and I use that lightly because I don't use this terminology. And they say ethnic pairings is because I mean that's a lot of people to say ethnic. All these people, you know, this is the wine, get Riesling, you know, and there's a lot of different styles of food that's not spicy that can still be in those ethnicities, nationalities, cultures that you are referring to. So to say to pair all the food from China, you know, with you know Riesling, is it also didn't make sense either. So like we didn't do enough to, you know, to be able to we meaning the larger wine education system wasn't truly showing that there is a lot of diversity. Is Chinese food or Asian food is not a monolith. So why are we saying this one wine is the one answer to like all of the food? So these were the whys, I would say, that came to mind when I was thinking about writing a book. And trust me, my agent, this is not the book she asked me to write. You know, that's an exclusive for you to know. No one's asked me that, but I can tell you I was very passionate about the idea. And then when she took the sample out to the market, people resonated very much with this book, and so that's when I guess that brought her on board. Like, oh, okay, it sounds like everyone's very excited about this style. So it kind of also confirmed that I was onto something, I guess, as well, and that maybe this is something to pay attention to. And that's now 3 years ago, to be honest, is when I got the actual deal. So there's something to say that from the moment that she and I connected, which is before I moved to Portugal. This is years ago. So this is before a lot of the trends, because I was already doing this with wine pairings for my communion dinner. So those that's where the seeds were planted for me to be able to do such project like this. And that wasn't very common for me to do, like to hear that someone's the sommelier at a Senegalese restaurant or working on those type of projects, which is what I was doing for my pop-up dinners. So I guess there is something to say about, it was like there's a thread that kind of brings it to the moment of the actual book. And yeah, I was just happy to be able to have, I guess, right timing. Like by the time the book was ready, by the time I got the agent, everything had to fall in line for me to be able to present a book at the time that people would be receptive to, like, oh yeah, actually, why are we not, talking about wines and foods from these cultures? So that's,
Absolutely. I'm just curious, Cha, what book did your agent want you to write?
she wanted me to write about my life, like being in wine. As I
Okay.
guess like your question
Like a
mentioned.
memoir.
Yeah, I guess like how your question was, like being a black woman who's opening a wine store. Like this is unique. So let's write a story about just like how has it been with you living and working in the wine industry, and that obviously has had multiple challenges for me. But it was something that I was like, I'm not ready to tell that story. But I do have something that I'm always ready to educate. Let's educate the people on wine. I think that always I tell my students, people always are going to question your validity. This is an industry that the pens kind of represent certain things to certain people. So going after
The
exam,
lapel pins, like for Master Court Sommelier.
exactly,
Yeah,
yeah, the
right.
WSET pens, all those. So that's going to give you a certain level. Or that's what I realized at the time, that's what it did for me. It allowed me to be in a room that I probably would not have originally been invited to without that, where other people may have the network to kind of like get them in the room before having the taking those exams. And so for me, I recognize there's another way, just like you mentioned about the Shirley Chisholm quote.
Yeah, no, it's great. Well, you have some really innovative pairings in your book. You pair General Chow's chicken with Spanish risotto, not Riesling. What was your thinking on pairing those two dishes? Because the chicken tends to be a very hot dish, right? Spicy hot, I mean.
No, because
No?
it's General Tso's is very American, so that's the reason why I also chose this dish. It was because it's a dish that kind of it's one of those dishes that if you are familiar with the stickiness of it all, it has this kind of sauce around it that it is cooked with chili flavors, but it is definitely more sweet sour
Okay.
flavor than anything. And so you have the Spanish risotto. I thought was a perfect pairing because it was very lush, like the dark fruit flavors that you get from a Spanish risotto, or even Italian risotto or Spanish mint. I think a lot of people think dark rosés. That's why I wanted to be very specific. I'm one of those people I don't know if you enjoy dark rosés versus light rosés. I feel like people think that's the only option, and that means quality. The lighter the rosé is, and I think that there's a place for every wine, and that's the theme throughout the book. So I was trying to play off of something that is a little bit more fuller in body and fuller in style, but still have enough freshness to be able to play off of the dynamic of such dish as General Tso's.
No, that's great. My favorite rosé is Tavel from the Rhone Valley. So do you think that
Okay.
would work?
Yeah, I think that the alcohol would be Tavel's tend to have a little bit more.
They
So,
do. 14% usually.
so I think that it will work. I think that you may feel the Tavel a little bit more than this, for this
Excellent.
dish.
That's what I'm going for. Now, you also pair Korean fried chicken with Cremant de Lemieux rosé, not beer. Maybe explain why you thought those two dishes would work together, or the dish and the wine.
Yeah, so just to take even a step back into like my wine selections, right? I think that the choices that I want, and going back to you asked about what was in other books that I wanted to make sure happened. I didn't want to keep saying the same sparkling wines 500 times. I think if sparkling wine or rosé in this case, if it works well as a good pairing for this dish, I mean, I can say Tavel, 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 but I think that is something to say about exploring also not just the cultures that we're pairing with, but different wines from different regions and
Right.
underrepresented regions. So twofold, I'm educating people about, do you have to get, this is not ruled, this is not written in stone. Cha said with this dish, this is the wine to get. It's more about, have you ever thought about having a Spanish rosado? I
Yeah.
could have said a rosé from, like I said, Italy or somewhere else that is darker. There's a bunch of Californian rosés, for example, or sparkling wines that would go well with the, as they call it, KFC as well, the Korean fried chicken. But I think there's something to say about, let's explore maybe an underrepresented region that does sparkling wine and sparkling rosé really well to give you an alternative. And so me and my co-author Layla, I made it very clear to her, we're gonna go through every pairing at least 2 to 3 times because I want to make sure we're not repeating any region or grape without some level of specificity so people can be able to explore that there's many ways you can have rosé or chardonnay or sparkling wine that will give you a different effect. So technically the real connection to back to your question about this dish, it was, I was looking at the balance of fat and acid. Right now, bubbling. I definitely want sparkling wine. There is a unique flavor to the seasoning in the KFC fried chicken that I felt like would go amazing with the rosé style. So to play up to the fruitiness, and they also use a lot of like more like dipping sauces. So I feel like that's what I was playing up to when I said go with rosé instead of having like a Blanc de Noir or a straight white sparkling wine from the region. So that was my thought process there.
That's a great idea, though. I like how you're integrating, as you say, underrepresented regions, but also just different, like, and not doing the same recommendation. Even though, the same old will work, why not
Yeah,
explore? The beauty of wine is in its diverse taste, so
exactly. I
why
mean, I'm
not go
sure
for
you
it?
can enjoy that with rosé from, Prosecco. I'm sure it will be just great. So that's why it's really more about me being able to give a kind of like a shout out to a different region that maybe people are not usually thinking about in this case. So that was the method to the madness of all the different wines. Trust me, you don't want to see the wine and food pairing matrix we have. It's kind of crazy. So
What
that
does it
we're
look
not.
like? Do you have
Oh
hundreds of
yeah,
cells? I mean, you were an engineer or are an engineer, so I'm sure
yeah.
you were very analytical.
Yes, the amount of Excel sheets that it took, that once I realized, I was like, I think we said Chardonnay too much. Let's go back. So I need to like, do a kind of quick like fine of how many times it was hits with Chardonnay. And it was I got real technical when it came to the pairings because of that. But it also challenged me as a sommelier. Like, okay, well, let's sit back and think about which wines, even though I may not have them often. Gratefully at the store, I can ask for some samples of some wines and be able to actually taste like, oh, actually, I haven't had that in a while. Let's try wines from this region and really see if that will work, and then make sure that it's included in the book. So I'm very much connected to the winemakers that I've worked with and been around. So I feel like this was a nice way for me to pay homage to the different regions, smaller regions, and even smaller varietals that you don't hear, or I should say rare varietals that you don't hear as often or see every day on a wine list. So
What's the most unusual pairing? It won't be perhaps unusual to you, but for readers
yeah.
who are used to North American food and wine and the usual, what do you think would be a surprising pairing for readers?
Oh man, I think this question is difficult because I feel like every dish may be like a shock, but I love the ones that I personally love. If I can answer that way, maybe not a shocker for most folks in the wine industry. Playing off of your KFC pairing just now is the Melba's fried chicken and waffles and Blanc de Blanc champagne. I really love. She has a strawberry a butter recipe that we include in the book, so you can go the rosé style as well. But if that wasn't included, I love that dish with yeah Blanc de Blanc. I think the brioche notes from a vintage champagne, which 100% Chardonnay grapes being used. And I didn't think that that was such an odd pairing because it's very common for the folks, I'm sure for you to know that fried chicken and and champagne goes well together. But when I say it to people who are not in the industry, they usually are very surprised when they hear that's one of my favorite pairings because they're like, I'm spending all this money on, champagne, to have it with fried chicken. So I guess this high low idea
Yeah,
is,
the shabby chic.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, they don't
exactly.
really. It's a hard time of them getting it at first. Like, I'm not spending all this money on champagne just to have it with fried chicken. Give me something fancy. I guess is what they want. And I'm telling you the truth. It's a hit. You're gonna
Oh
love this.
yeah.
So I
Well,
do
and I
love the
think
interaction.
sometimes the fancier the wine, the more simple the simpler the food should be, so the wine can shine.
Yeah.
If you love wine, you've got a beautiful Blanc de Blanc. But what about the waffles? Would they not be very sweet and clash with the champagne that's usually pretty dry?
Yeah, no, I thought it was a great pairing. I have it. I personally enjoy it all the time. I think that maybe her recipe. Let's just say that the good part about shooting the photos for the book is that you're actually able to taste that you get to taste it as well. Hopefully when people do wine books, they're probably not tasting too much food. But in my case, I had a great experience with that, and yeah, it worked out perfectly. I
Did
think that. Yeah, I think there was the bread notes that you would get from the champagne. The clash really can only be if you are, and this is also, Natalie, I think a great question here is because it is kind of your own adventure.
yeah.
When people talk about spiciness and using Rieslings, for example, to be able to calm the spice, but my palate, for example, like spice. So why would I
Right.
use a wine to calm the spice when
Huh.
I actually love the intensity of the spice? So
Right.
I do feel like that's something that to each his own. I
Hmm.
think there is still a great pairing for me. Again, I wrote a whole book on the fact that there's all these wines out here. You should explore them. But I also want to give people the luxury of saying I actually really did enjoy that with this dish. So I just maybe introduced them to something else. Not that this is the rule. Like, this is the only thing. You only
Yeah.
can eat fried chicken and champagne together. And that's why I said upset about the rosé. Like, the rosé, I feel like is the real that chef's kiss. That's the
It's a
real
great,
pairing.
yeah, it's a great pairing. So if you do like spice and you want to bring it on, you don't want to tamp down the spice. Which
Exactly.
wine would you? What is one wine that you might recommend with hot
Yeah,
spice?
I think that now I'm trying to remember the jerk chicken dish, like something that is like truly spicy. That I normally go for wines that are bolder, that can meet the jerk flavor. So peppers, Scotch bonnet is the pepper that they use to intensify the spice in jerk. And so I actually look for wines that can actually match it in spice. So I'm looking for pepper in my wine, and that can be a Bordeaux that is right bank Merlot focus. I can see a really nice Cab Franc going with it as well. So I'm playing up to the flavors of the spicy dish, not just because the heat is what's there. I feel like that's unfortunate. I understand some people may need that in order to actually enjoy it, but for other folks who can take a little bit of spice, I feel like finding the elements that's within the seasoning that you can find and do more of a comparing instead of contrasting, which is what
Mm,
we're normally taught. Is like, if it's spicy, get something that's gonna calm the spice down and be a contrast flavor. If you
right.
can handle the spice, find something that's gonna match it where it's at and still be enjoyed. And of course, you can find some really young Bordeaux's today in the market that are ready to drink, that actually do have a lot more fruit forward characteristics of that blueberry notes, bramble flavor that will be a great pairing with a dish that's so rich and deep too.
I'm wondering if black pepper Shiraz, that's an actual brand name from Australia, would work because I'm thinking the black pepper with the
I think that's next level spice. So then, to be honest, that's black pepper spice. I'm looking at green bell pepper and the fact that the Scotch
hey,
bonnet's right.
right.
So if you want to take it spicier than that, I feel like going to yes, the Shiraz, going with a very peppery dish. I feel like that would be, for my level, that would be probably a little bit too much pepper for me. But the folks who really, and I am not Caribbean, so I can tell you right now, folks who don't mind, taking up that, what you're saying is probably a spot on pairing for folks who want to go a little bit, like, take the Merlot to the next level, going with the Syrah Shiraz idea with something that's a little bit more peppery.
I'd probably have to whimper back to my Tevel Rosé after trying that combination. It's probably not for me either. Um, do you think there's one pairing that you think might get some pushback, like, oh no, that could not work. Like I get fried chicken and champagne. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah.
Do you think in the traditional circles there might be a pairing where people go, "You're kidding, right?"
I hope not. I hope everybody's
Okay.
willing to explore, but I do think there's a few pairings that I really leaned into culturally. Like, what's the connection here due to the history of the country as a ex-colonized country connect, so a lot of the Angolan dishes, Mozambique, so that wouldn't be odd, but I think the way that I'm pairing would be a different way that we're taught, right? So if an ex-colony like Mozambique, and we have Mozambican shrimp dish in the actual as one of the pairings as well, and I'm actually pairing it with wines from Portugal, which was the ex-colonizer. There's a different like historical connection to choosing wines from there, and then this book really focused on giving people, like, if you was on a jet to holiday, as they say on Instagram, if you was on a jet to holiday and you were in Mozambique, you may be like, okay, or in Brazil, for example, why is there so many Portuguese wine? And Portugal is nowhere near here, and instead of French wines or somewhere else, and then you start recognize, oh, that's because this was an actual, they speak Portuguese, they actually are ex-colony, and
Right.
so they have trade ties that still allows this country to be able to have they can read the label, they know the grapes, they're not intimidated with the Portuguese language or the words on it, so then you're like, oh, okay, now this pairing makes more sense because of context, historical context, right?
Right.
Political context, so it's not that there's not a French wine or maybe even a Chilean wine that can't go well with this Brazilian dish. It's more the fact that there is a connection back to Portugal that still resonates with their food culture, or gas, food and beverage in this case. So I feel like there may be maybe some pushback may come from there, but I try my best in each chapter to kind of explain more of the reason that's the way, or the way of my thinking when I thought
Yeah.
about culturally. And Brazil, for example, is a place that I've spent some time, so I actually saw that firsthand. So it allowed me to also ask, like, oh, okay, yeah, they have a lot of wine they make right here in South America. Why are there so much Portuguese? Why are we going
Sure,
all the way
that
to
makes
Europe?
sense. Yeah.
And so that was something I started thinking about as well.
Because you talk about cultural terroir. I've heard of airwar, what's in the air, and merroir, what's in the sea. Like that,
Yes,
the vines are
fierce.
they pick up
Yep.
everything. But cultural terroir, is that part of what you're referring to there? And can you give us another example?
Yes, I think that culturally the connections can be something that is, in this case, a country that was oppressed, and these folks are now learning about an actual like wine culture. So just to give you even more of a general idea of this, vines were planted in a lot of colonies at the time during imperialism and colonization, due to civilize or make the area or place civil. That was one of their ways of how you want to say, it was one of the tactics of imperialism at the time, is you land like how you would land on Mars, you put the American flag there. This is like, okay, we plant vines here because the Dutch has now arrived in South Africa. The Portuguese is now here, so this is where we're going to plant the vines. Even though a lot of them did not succeed at that time, it took immigrants, obviously French Huguenots come into South Africa later on, Italian immigrants come into Brazil later on to actually perfect and actually make the wine what it is today. But there is that first planting of the vines that actually started from a lot of the colonies, and that was their goal, to actually like have their stamp or make their mark in these different countries that they were at. So I think that's important for historical context when you think about, well, who thought to like make wine in Brazil or Uruguay or Argentina anyway. It really started with this as the thought of the colonizer to show up in this way, in an agricultural way. This is how we putting our foot down or our stamp on the land. So that was one, main part of why I thought that was important to include in this kind of cultural context of terroir, is to give that background first. And then for the actual, whether it's the music, the food, the lifestyle, I think no matter what country we're talking about, whether it's Italy or Argentina, etc. I think there's a lot to say about what folks are eating kind of influence what they're making as their wine, right? It's not crazy to think that Italian wine goes well with dishes that have tomato base, right? So
Sure.
even if the dish is not from Italy and there's a influence of tomato paste or tomato sauce in the dish, picking an Italian wine sounds like it works, like they this is why they make their wine, and it pairs well with pizza, pasta, a lot of tomato based dishes. So that's kind of cultural, where I'm not looking at what grows together goes together, but there is this similarity of kind of what the produce are of that country in the main produce of that dish, and actually seeing how there's some other cultural connections in that case as well. And the music I mentioned, I mean, the lifestyle of the people, whether it's what the dish they're eating, and the like, there's a lot of nightlife or partying, then maybe it makes sense that they're making a lot of bubbles, in that area, in those regions. So in my head right now, I'm thinking about Brazil still, in the case that the Brazilian sparkling wine hopefully we become more of a thing here in regards to America's exports in the future, and or imports in the future. But right now, obviously, given all the tariffs, etc., we can understand if like even Europe is having a hard time trying to hold place here. But a lot of sparkling wines are doing great down there. Even Moet Chandon has also invested in the growing the terroir there for their own sparkling wines too, and so I feel like that makes sense. You think of Brazil, you think of festivals, you think of samba dancing. They would want sparkling wine. They were very vibrant culturally. It makes
Yeah.
sense that bubbles is going to be the thing that really takes off there. So I
Yeah.
feel like that's another type of I guess I look at it as the anthropology of wine, like understanding the people, their culture, their ways, their way of life, and being able to connect that to the type of wine makes a lot more sense on what wine they should grow. I'm no geologist, so I can't tell you if the soil is right for a particular grape and the type of wine they should make, but it makes sense if they're buying and drinking a lot of that style, and it makes sense for them to then make that style themselves.
Absolutely. And I love how write about terroir by osmosis, just underscoring what you're just saying right now, how the wine becomes, inseparable from the music and the aromas and the culture and the dancing and everything else. So,
The seasoning,
especially,
the spices, right? It makes sense
yeah,
to be
yeah,
able to make wine that actually is a pairing with your culture. And so I think that us, for foreigners, us, everyone, everywhere else, for us to understand what makes sense when you arrive can tell you a lot about whether you're making a dish at home, or you're going to a local Moroccan restaurant, or if you're actually taking a trip to Morocco. Like, you're gonna see within the different bazaars and everything, like you're out there, the spices and the seasons,
mm,
you're gonna smell that in the air. And so having dishes that is going to be using those, and therefore making wine that pairs well, I feel like it all is connected at the end of the day. So that is
absolutely.
that makes
Yeah.
sense to me. That's the
And
cultural terroir for me.
yeah, the cultural terroir. I love that concept, because you even use it when you're, like instead of what grows together goes together, what travels together kind of goes together. Like Piri Piri Chicken's journey from Africa, then to Portugal, to South Africa, and beyond. It's sort of picking up all of these cultural nuances along the
Correct.
way. Yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah.
that's the important part of, if peri peri as a seasoning, as a spice, as a pepper, is being used to make certain dishes, that it makes sense that how, when immigrants come to live in Portugal, they're bringing that with them. And
Hmm.
you'll find, I don't know if you've ever been to Portugal before, but
Yep. Hmm.
yes, so you'll see peri peri often you're nowhere near South Africa, even though you're in Portugal, but it's on a lot of dishes, and that has a lot to say. That's about how people play a large role, like our own culture, what we bring with us, like you mentioned, and how it's our, we would say, food ways, is very important when you're thinking about pairing as well.
What do you mean when you say food ways?
foodways is, you mentioned traveling, so how the foodways is like culturally connecting how this peri peri made its way to Portugal. That's the
Okay.
foodway of
Okay.
that spice, etc. So so when people backtrack a dish and you go, how, how did this, why are people making this dish here, even though the elements of the ingredients are not originally from here? Trace that act of tracing it back is the food ways of actually doing it.
Are there wine ways?
You know what's so funny? I don't know. It doesn't sound as cool as food ways.
No, it doesn't. I think
I've been
that.
trying to come up with something, for beverage in general. As you've seen in the book as well, I talk about rum, etc. So there is these kind of like, how do we track back like where some of these origins or stories are? But maybe we could say for your here for the podcast, we're gonna call it wine ways or
Sure. We'll just
yeah,
start it now.
yeah.
um, Now, you mentioned during your time in Little Senegal, locals would ask you about wine pairings for dishes. What was your process of figuring out pairings when your training hadn't prepared you for them? I'm probably not pronouncing this correctly, but yassa poulet, a chicken dish from Little Senegal. Like, how would you begin to suggest a wine for that dish?
Yeah, and just going back to my conversation about the store. So Little Senegal is like a one block and it several blocks, but it's on 116th Street in Harlem. So this
Okay.
is my neighborhood that I grew up in, and then over time now it's kind of grown into this particular immigrant community of Senegalese folks who are now my neighbors. And so that was, meaning literally like in my building, there's Senegalese people living there. So I'm used to smelling the scents of all of the spices that they use. I'm now going to work to the wine shop and I'm smelling it in the air, as I'm walking. So I'm almost the food almost like transport me to Senegal. It is on my bucket list. I've never been.
Mm.
But that neighborhood became, very important for that same. That's why New York City is so unique. Like as someone growing up in New York, you get to be such in close proximity to cultures and be able to learn so much without even having to have a passport. You could, and so there is a lot to say about the amount of folks who came in from who were coming particularly like that street became almost a destination. So it was less about the locals because a lot of Senegalese folks actually practice Islam, so they don't drink any alcohol. But it was folks who were coming to the actual store because a lot of their restaurants were BYOB since they didn't serve alcohol. And so, as someone who's obviously not Muslim, you would go to your local wine shop, which was ours right on the corner. And I had the ability to get to know the dishes from folks who were traveling up, or maybe locals like myself who were not Islamic or practicing Islam or wasn't from Senegal, who were still eating in the area. And I would say that's one of the main things. It's not the same way with adventuring with the wine, maybe being adventurous with your food. So that's how I got into pairing. It's like, hey, everybody keep going to these restaurants and I never ate here. Maybe I should start eating here too, so I can start understanding. So that's what I was like, because I didn't know. I was stumped. I didn't know the dish. I didn't the one you said. I didn't know what it tastes like. I had no idea if it was spicy, if it was not. I didn't know what to expect. And so the first things first was like, okay, I had a few customers come in and I'm recognizing that this is going to be a need, really quickly. And so I myself started patronizing those restaurants in order to understand the dishes and ask more questions, and then obviously looking it up for myself. So just doing that research was very important.
And so, did you land on a wine style that you tended to recommend for this chicken dish?
For this particular dish, yeah, I mean, I feel like this one is heavy with onions and garlic. So
Mm.
I feel like anything that you can use that is Chardonnay adjacent would be the perfect dish for this.
What would
So
be Chardonnay adjacent?
Encruzado from Portugal.
Okay, okay.
Are
And
you
why would it
familiar?
work with? No, I'm not. Why don't
Okay.
you tell us why that would work with garlic and onions?
I would say like you find the same kind of treatment that you would see on a Chardonnay, where you may find a slight oak aging, So I'm not thinking about Chardonnay like from Chablis. I'm thinking Chardonnay that's Burgundy Chardonnay, or something that's Chardonnay that's rich and has the context of maybe some lees aging, and you can find that in other styles of wines like in Cruzado, for example. And
Okay.
so that would be a perfect pairing for this dish, that this chicken dish that's been baked and actually have amazing flavors. Is not going to be overwhelmed by this grape, the Chardonnay or Cruzado, which has a nice, Cruzado specifically may have a more cooked green bell pepper in it as well that I love. So I know people like calling Chardonnay like a very neutral grape that grows everywhere. Well, I think there is something about the winemakers. I feel like as like a whiskey maker, the same thing. If you make Chardonnay, you almost become like a whiskey maker. Like it's your touch. Like, do you choose to put it in oak? Do you choose to stir the lees or keep it on the lees at all?
To
Or
make
you
it
choose
creamy,
it?
yeah.
Yeah, to make yeah. How much mallow is it undergoing? Like I feel like Chardonnay is a great, like how a whiskey maker distiller would do. You actually have the choice to do
It's a
that.
winemaker's wine because it will
Winemakers
bend to the will.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so you are able to do that. And I feel like the wine, other varietals that are known to work in same similar ways, I feel like is a kind of great match for this dish. You really want the food to show here. It has amazing characteristics of herbs, and it's very lush dish. And you have the sauce. It's always about that garlic onion combo that they're doing that is kind of really singing for this couscous chicken. And you could get plantains on the side as well. So it is definitely a very full dish, and I think a white wine that is aromatic, Viognier would work well, as perfectly too here. Can go. So I feel like that's what you want to lean into: rich
Yeah.
white wines that are medium plus body.
That sounds great. You're making me hungry and thirsty, so you're doing your job, Cha. Um, Now, in a largely observant Muslim country, you also talked about mint tea and fresh juices. How did tasting these non-alcoholic drinks maybe help you improve your own wine descriptions?
Yeah, I think that Turkey, Morocco, for example, that I hit on in the book as well. I think that it made me understand kind of like their drinking culture, and then pull out like how we would say in our wine lexicon gooseberries for Sauvignon Blanc as a traditional tasting note. I feel like it at least helped me even with developing the flavor wheel, or when I'm describing wines when I'm in front of guests, knowing what their background is. It helped me to be able to explain wines that were, I can translate maybe this wine knowing that fact about them, or in a restaurant that I know make, or a chef making a dish that's related to this. It wouldn't make sense for me to use, I would say, I'm just going to keep going to gooseberry because that's the easy one, or petrol, which of course we have gasoline everywhere, but we don't use the word petrol. So I wanted to stay away from using terminologies and vocabularies that is not, if I'm talking to my demographic, is I know where they're from and I know what they're drinking or I know what they're eating. So I feel like having the fresh juices, even when I recently was in Australia, and having fresh juices of was it red currant juice? I know red currant comes up a lot. I've eaten red and black currant, but they used red and black currant often in fresh juices as well as in candy in Australia. Like it's a common candy flavor. And so when you actually are traveling there, you now are immersed in multiple ways with maybe fruits and juices, different ways that you can have that. And now it adds to your own lexicon, and you can be able to now translate to who's, as I say, read the room, and be able to,
Right,
instead of
right.
keep saying to my guests as a sommelier, oh, I'm smelling, it's something. And they're like, I never had that before. So you smelling gooseberries is not helping because I don't know what that means or what, what it is.
Sure.
So I feel like as a sommelier or a wine educator, equally is our part to do that type of research and taste those juices if we can't get them in its raw form of the fruit, to be familiar, especially if you're working at a restaurant that may be more diverse. So
Yeah.
and like back what you said about the wine shop, I didn't realize the shop was going to have so many people as guests visiting to those restaurants. And I would now need, because the restaurant was, I mean, the shop was not Senegalese owned or anything. So,
Sure.
so I wasn't prepared that that would be like a style of food that I would often had to pair with. But it definitely put me in a place where I was like, okay, let me lock in with this and do that kind of out the textbook kind of research or exploring and R&D on my own, the same way chefs would if they were building their own menu.
Menu,
Like
yeah.
that's we should look at ourselves as you know that's our role. We're not making the wine as somms and wine educators, but we can do some R&D on our own by actually tasting fruit juices. The common practice, people go, you want to learn about wine, go to a farmer's market, try all the all the things at the markets. So this is the same thing the way I explored when I was in different countries, by having those juices and having spices as well from there.
That's great advice for everybody to widen your vocabulary, but just also your taste, memory, and so on. Now, you mentioned you have a flavor wheel that's very different from standard industry flavor wheels. Tell us what's different. What's on there, and how did you come up with it?
Yeah, so I developed, for those who don't know, the flavor wheel is very commonly used in kind of maybe beginner wine classes to help folks navigate the tasting, like deductive tasting. So if you are trying to, you can't think, I'm sure, Natalie, you've been around customers who's like, I don't know what this smells like. It smells like wine,
Yes,
And so the
exactly.
flavor wheel is kind of like the training wheels on your bike, to kind of help you, like give you some core areas to be able to choose from, of aromas and tasting notes. And so I said, okay, let's look at some of my common tasting notes that I've used. So I actually just backtracked through my old wine journals and tasting notes and actually seen what ones I use often. Clearly, there's probably a lot more out there, and there's ones that, back to I mentioned, that is not part of my normal vocabulary. So why would I start throwing in things that I don't use and smell often? But I also recognize that maybe I started finding more often in wines that folks maybe don't say often. Let's say saffron.
Okay.
Maybe saffron will come up often. Turmeric. These are spices that is in my spice cabinet because I cook with them,
Sure.
but maybe not in yours. And so, sofrito is a sauce we talk about, and sazon is a seasoning in Caribbean culture that they use, Puerto Rican culture, cuisine. So these are things that I cook with. That's in my house, and so I was like, okay, I find them in wine, even though WSET vocabulary don't use them,
Hmm.
and I feel like, oh, this would go well with that. So it actually is allowing me to give maybe everyone the right to say, hey, you can build your own flavor wheel, go through your own tasting notes. What are some juices, spices that you're familiar with that you can be able to put? And I employ everyone to do that, to be honest. And if you do have a journal, I think try to pull out, like, how come I always get this note whenever it's like a plastic, I go new, some people say new tennis, balls, you hear a lot, new car, maybe somebody ain't never got a new car before, they don't know what you're talking about, but they may know what new sneakers smell like. They
Yeah.
may know what freshly opened Barbie doll smell like.
Yeah.
uh,
Band-aids. I
and
get
they
that all the time.
and they
Band-aids. So
yeah,
weird.
so I feel like let's let people have the ability to actually use what's in their own everyday life. And I
Sure.
feel like these small things, like we talk about microaggressions of the cultures when black people are in white and predominantly white environments, etc. These are the small ways I feel like in wine, folks maybe didn't even recognize it is a microaggression to force someone to say new car if they've never bought a new car, and that's
Mm,
a class issue. That's not race, right?
sure.
Car go, it smell like new car. It smell like tennis. You ain't never played tennis in your life. You like smells like golf balls. You never play. Like these are things that are you still separating folks by saying that's the smell, and they've never been exposed to it. So I feel like we
Right.
should be more open to putting as many things out there that can be synonymous with that smell, and maybe no one's gonna help us those who are marginalized be, welcome us to the industry. What I recognize is that's something that I had to do myself. So literally create your own flavor wheel, jot down those notes. And then when someone says new car, and if you never had a new car, you say, you know what, to me it smelled like new sneaker. Put new sneaker for your own notes so that you can know when you come back to it and build up that palate memory like you just mentioned.
Absolutely. It's far more concrete because it's tied into your real life. Is your wheel, your flavor wheel is in your book, correct?
Yes.
Yes, because I was just going to say, can you get it on the website? But surely
It's in the book.
Yes.
I'm like, I marked it just in case sometimes because I feel like I have no idea what's on there and someone calls out a note. It's literally still in the index, okay? So yeah, you definitely have to, you'll see it in all its glory right there.
That's awesome. Oh, you've got the copy there. That's
Yeah.
great. Excellent. Beautiful colors.
Yes.
Yeah, multicolors. So you divide scents and tastes into 4 macro categories. Is this related to your flavor wheel? Fruity, floral, mineral, vegetal, spice, and chemical.
Yes, that is
Okay.
exactly the sections in the, I guess, the core section of the flavor wheel.
Right.
And that's usually how I begin. A lot of people feel intimidated just going, oh, I smell, thyme and I smell rosemary. They don't want to go straight there. You actually got to build them up. A lot of my students. And
Yeah.
so that's like the best place to start is to actually kind of like, do you smell herbs or do you smell, fruits, just kind of start with these categories. And then they're like, oh no, it's definitely more fruit. Now they get more comfortable. Now you're okay, which fruit? Strawberries or lemon? Like things that are completely different so that they can be able to feel more like, okay, no, it's not lemon, or yeah, it is lemon, definitely not strawberry, and then we can work our way into categories like, okay, so citrus notes within citrus, what do we have here? So I feel like that is my way of kind of getting them to actually peel back the confidence, like trust your palate. You know what lemons taste like compared to strawberries. You don't need a psalm to tell you that, right? And so
It's true.
that is
It's
how
true.
I go about guiding them along the way in that process.
I like the whole new sneaker thing. So we could dive into that. Is it Nike or is it Brooks? Like, be specific with your
This is
sneakers.
good. This is good. Yeah. Yeah.
So if you could mandate one change to the current educational curriculum
Yes.
to make it more inclusive of global cuisines and palates and pairing, what would you recommend? Is there a topic, a region, or what would you add or change?
Yeah, I mean, the book is about pairing, but ultimately is about, a lot of historical context that I try to make sure was important. So I would say adding wine history is something, that's why it was important for me to include places like Georgia and Turkey in the book as well. I feel like there's something about, we talk about wine from like as if France invented winemaking. And I do feel that if we're more inclusive of, if you want to call it the ancient wine world, if you want to call Italy, Spain, and France the old wine world, if we think about those other countries, it will give us a more global context of where wine is coming from and where quality wine can be made when we talk about Israel and Georgia and Turkey. And I would want to change that. That's kind of where my feet is at. We get to make more of a connection on truly how the Phoenicians, was highly important for this to move and the importance of trade, etc., to actually even get to France, or the Romans and their work and traveling with wines from there. But unfortunately we don't talk. We touch on it, especially now that Georgia is becoming a major player in the
Right.
conversation about wine. So you hear about it. I feel like way more today than we heard about it when I got into the wine industry in 2012. I didn't know much about Georgian wine, and I definitely didn't know anything about wines coming from that area of the world. So I
Sure.
do hope that today we actually start including more of actual wine history and knowledge.
That's a great suggestion. Of course, we're talking about Georgia, the country, not the state. But I
Yes.
love your whole thing about, 'cause we know New World is, North America, Australia, New Zealand, Old World, Italy, France. But I love there should be Ancient World. It should be, in there as well, in
Yes.
equal measure, to
Yes.
get that sense of history and cultural terroir. Cha, this has been a pleasure. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to mention as we wrap up?
No, I feel like I'm excited to for the book to come out, and November 4th is when it's out, and the pre-orders are currently available. I will
Okay.
be doing a few wine release parties, so I don't know, and tastings and events throughout the whole month of November
All
in
right.
different cities. So please be on the lookout if you're not following me already on Instagram or on my website. So my website is my name, CHAMCCOY, so chamccoy.com.
Okay.
And on Instagram, cha, CHA underscore squared, SQUARED on
Okay.
Instagram. So those are the main places where I'll be. In LinkedIn, of course, you can find me on my name there, Cha McCoy, where I will be sharing the locations, and there's ticketed and unticketed events. So some free events, some pay for, and supporting local independent bookstores. And at least in November right now, it's 5 different cities. So
Good for
it
you.
is
That's
quite
great.
the tour that's going on. So please be on the lookout for that.
That's awesome. And we'll put links in the show notes to where people can find you online and those events. The podcast will be published just after your book comes out, so people
Okay.
should know that they can buy it when they hear this podcast,
Okay.
whether it's online or at their local bookstore. So I wish you all the best with the book launch. I'm sure it's going to be terrific, Cha. Really well done and a great approach. And you've given me lots to think about, so I'm sure our listeners are rethinking the whole pairing thing now.
I hope so. Thank
All
you for having
right.
me, Natalie.
All right. Cheers. Don't log off just yet, but thank you so much.
Cheers.
Cheers.